improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Hey, this is Brad Colbert, the Iceman. Welcome to a special edition of the Carry On podcast, Sitrep, where we take the week's news and current events and spend a little time talking about them, rendering opinions, a little bit of fact, maybe unpack some angles that hadn't been talked about. And with that in mind, we're going to open up with the speech that everyone's talking about. Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, calling all of the flag generals and admirals for a speech. Pep rally is what many of them are referring to. I have been asked by a couple of people what my thoughts on his comments were, and it's kind of mixed. First, let's just take the event in and of itself. Unprecedented. It has never been done before, having every member of the generals, admirals at that echelon in one location, Quantico, Virginia. I know the venue, been there, and addressing them en masse about topics that most could have received virtually, whether that's email, VTC, policy letter, white paper. Didn't have to be done on purpose, but I will say it was impactful that it was. It is one thing to get a policy memo from the Secretary of War. It is another thing to sit in an arena with your peers and listen to him speak. I didn't necessarily mind the assemblage. A lot of people said that it was unnecessary, that it shouldn't have been done, that they were called to the carpet. I don't think that was the case at all. I think that he is well within his rights as the Secretary of War to bring his senior staff in and speak to them. Now, as far as the content of the speech, I didn't mind the enforcement of going back to the core competency of the Department of War, which is now the Department of War. I don't mind reminding everybody of why we're here, to secure the peace by preparing for war. It's an old adage. We've heard it before, but maybe it was packaged in a slightly better way. Maybe it was bundled for media consumption, but whatever your thoughts are, I don't have a problem with reminding everybody why we wore the uniform, and that is to be prepared to enforce the nation's diplomacy with force. The grooming standards, the height and weight, the PT, the physical fitness, didn't have a problem with it. Most people, I think, in the combat arms MOSs are used to doing that Monday through Sunday. Most people that wear the uniform are used to doing that stuff regardless of MOS. So I don't think it's a huge issue that he simply reminded everybody, hey, listen, we're not going to issue no shave chits. We're not going to issue exceptions for being out of the height and weight standards. We are not going to allow diluted standards of physical fitness and qualifications. I don't have an issue with that. And I think the only ones that are the ones that probably can't maintain the standard. Are there going to be losses? Yep, there are. You're going to find some folks that can't meet whatever the standards are for the various branches of service that they're a member of, and they may be looking for a new job. That's unfortunate for those that may no longer be employed, but I think the health of the body itself, holistically, I think it's going to be better for it. There was a comment made about, and I'm paraphrasing pretty drastically, so give me a little bit of latitude here, but essentially that women have no business in combat, that women have no business to a lesser extent in the military. There's a lot of people that unpacked his comments as misogynistic, targeting women. Probably could have been a better way to have said it. But what he said, if you stop, put aside your emotional attachment to whether he is or is not suited for the job, whether you like him, you don't like him, leave all that aside and take what he said at face value. Regardless of gender, you either meet a standard or you don't. If you meet the standard, the minimum qualifications for whatever the MOS is that you're going into, great. Welcome aboard. Valuable member of the team. You don't, it's not for you. Go find something else in the organization that you're capable of doing and do it well. First and foremost, I don't have a problem with women in the military. I've never had a problem with women in the military. I don't care. Women in combat, slightly different. Here's the thing. Not because they're women, but mixed units, mixed combat units, I have a problem with. And it's not the women's fault. I'm going to pause there, circle back to it. I want to finish my preceding point before digressing too deeply. Hegseth said that we changed the standards for women. He's not wrong. Not entirely. Years ago, under the Obama administration, it was directed that the armed forces revise their standards to be equal between both sexes. I know because I sat on many discussions about what that means for the particular MOSs that, I was a part of. Recon Moreno. We didn't change the standards, but certain military occupational specialties had to look at the things that they were asking their folks to do and see if they were biased towards men. Look, there are certain jobs in the military that you need certain chromosomes to be able to do. I don't know how to say it any better than that. If you're a tanker or an artillery man, you need to be able to pick up a 70-pound shell, load it into the cannon, and you have to be able to pick that shell up from the ground and lift it chest level to get it loaded. You have to be able to do that. Now, to say that, well, it's not fair, I'm not strong enough to do it, that wasn't created to exclude a female from doing it. It just is. It's a fact. Devoid of your thoughts and opinions about it, it stands on its own merit. If you can't pick up the artillery shell and load it into the gun, then you shouldn't be an artillery man or woman or person. I don't know. And that's just, it is what it is. So certain MOSs had to be looked at in that context. Are you biased towards men? Does the special operations community allow for women? And most of the services at the end of this introspective scrubbing came out with some minor adjustments, but most of them are like, look, like I said with the tanks and the artillery, we didn't create this. This is just a fact. If you can't do X, Y, and Z, you can't hold this job. I think that's all that the Secretary of War was stating. I think his comments were taken out of context. I think that they were spun pretty aggressively. Again, finishing my earlier point, I don't have a problem with women in combat. I have a problem with mixed combat units. Now, the Israelis do it. Socially, they have the history to allow that. U.S. culture, having worn the uniform for 21 years, I'm going to tell you, having a female in your ranks in a combat unit is challenging. And I'm just going to put it like this, because there's no other way to really put it. Everyone's going to want to fuck her, and those that do are immediately going to get everyone else antagonistic towards them because they're jealous, because they didn't get a fucker. Women cause problems in combat units because of the long periods of time that combat units are forward deployed without the logistical train that goes with rear echelon. You don't get access to a shower. You don't get access to a toilet. You're oftentimes sleeping in close quarters with one another. You are under little sleep, little food, long periods of physical intensity, and you have to be able to keep up with that, with all of it. Combat units comprised entirely of women, I wouldn't have a problem with it. And then I said that as far back as 2001 to anyone that gives a shit. But when you mix units in that context, it causes issues. And again, it's not the woman's fault. I am not saying that it is the woman's fault. It's the man's fault. We are not mature enough to have you in our midst in a foxhole. We're not. And at some point in our evolution, we might. That's not today. Because as I said, everyone is going to want to fuck her. They are. And it's going to cause problems. It is going to cause issues. They did a study back at Quantico a long time ago, and they did an attack, and I'm paraphrasing again. There's more to it than this, but here's the gist of it. They did a large-scale mass attack. They had several females mixed in the ranks. They made those females simulated casualties. And again, hyperbole, but basically the attack ground to a halt while everybody walked over, ran over, whatever, and tried to treat at the detriment to the attack the female who was the simulated casualty. And that's just what's going to happen. You almost want it both ways, because you want men to be chivalrous, which begs us to do all of these things for you. But in the doing, we're going to ignore all of the other things that need doing. And then you yell at us because we're either not doing the things that we're supposed to do because we stopped and catered to you, or we catered to you in the first place. Either way, it's a no-win situation. So Hegseth's comments, I don't feel were misogynistic towards women. I think all feelings aside, you have to look at the simple point that he was trying to make, which is the military exists to win wars. Whatever it takes to achieve that end should be done. And that means hard training and hard standards. You either meet those standards or you don't. In the time that I wore the uniform as a recon Marine, I came across one female, who beyond the shadow of a doubt would have qualified had she tried out. She didn't, because it was not allowed at that time. There are some exceptionally fit females who will thrive in those environments, but they're the minority. And that's just a biological fact of evolution. The men are predisposed towards certain physical adversity that women are not. I don't know how else to say it any cleaner than that. The other thing that happened on the heels of Hegseth's speech was Commander-in-Chief coming on stage to address the generals and admirals himself. Now, for those of you that don't know, if you are a commissioned officer, you are not allowed to criticize publicly the Commander-in-Chief. You swore an oath not just to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, but there's some provisos in that commission that says you are not allowed to publicly criticize your commanding officers. And that pretty much stops at the President of the United States. So the president comes on a stage and no one clapped and the room was silent. That's decorum. That is exactly what should happen when a group of 6, 7, 8, 9 officers are in the room with the commander-in-chief. You don't, what did people expect these generals and admirals to do? Rise, stand on their feet, and give a thunderous applause? It's incredibly unprofessional. We don't do that. Now, if you're an enlisted man or woman and the president comes and talks to the group, yeah, that's a little bit different because the enlisted person isn't bound by the same rules and regulations that the officers are bound to. So I don't think the president understood that. I think he came onto the stage and expected everybody to give him a woot woot. Didn't happen. Shouldn't happen. And then the media picked up on that absence of applause and was like, oh, clearly they don't like him. They have disdain for him. No, fuckwad, that's not it at all. Do you understand nothing about the military? I would have done the exact same thing if I was in that room. You are there in an official capacity, and to give endorsement or condemnation of anything that's said is completely unprofessional. You're not allowed to, while you're wearing the uniform, endorse any particular political party or condemn it. You are supposed to be completely neutral. Otherwise, it's a slippery slope, because then you start to question the orders that you're given based off who is giving those orders. And that is not how this fucking works. It's either a lawful order or it's not. You can't get into the nuance of, well, he was a Democratic president and I probably don't agree with his madness. So I hope people understand that when he came on stage, there shouldn't, and I'm glad there wasn't any clapping or applause. And for Trump not to understand that just shows a slight disconnect on his understanding of the military. So that wraps up those two topics.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting too to add from me the ignorance of the general public that's getting exploited in that instance by the media.
Yeah.
Because they aren't connected.
What do you mean they aren't connected?
Well, to the military or the culture of the military, they don't understand it. They don't.
No, because you never fucking served, and the only exposure that you have to the military is when you turn on the television, then you're not going to understand, right? The same reason that no war movie would ever be made when you show what's really like in the military. No one's going to see the troops turning weapons into the armory and cleaning everything up and doing laundry and shaving. Wow, that's fucking boring, but that's real life. Just like it's real life that you have customs and courtesies. And for those generals and admirals to stand up and start clapping thunderously would have been wildly inappropriate. They did exactly what they should have done. Yeah, you're right. They're disconnected.
Is there anything else about what Hegseth said or how he ended the speech that you thought was interesting?
I don't know. I mean, look, there's a certain amount of politics that has unavoidably been painted on a lot of the day-to-day things this administration does. I'm not going to weigh in on, well, we shouldn't have said that, and that was inappropriate. And like I said, he is within his right to say to whomever whatever he wants within the Department of War. And he chose to bring this venue together and to say the things that he said. And what specific comment are you looking for feedback on? I think I have an idea, but
I mean, the ending comment, the fuck around and find out.
Yeah, that got some responses from the audience members. I think that we went through a period under the last administration and to honestly, to a lesser extent, the last three administrations, where we had this reticence to get our hands dirty. It was always the barest of responses to anything, anywhere in the world. The only exceptions was Iraq and Afghanistan, where we just went full tilt. But aside from that, we're always doing these little teeny incremental responses. The escalation of force is always really, really metered. And on the one hand, you might say, but isn't that the mark of good diplomacy? To do the least amount of force necessary to solve a problem? Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, the end result of that metered response is we've got a world on fire, and the world is always melting down. I got it. But you have major near peers who are way outside of the box, and the only reason that they have been allowed to be outside of the box is because there was no fuck around and find out response from the U.S. We're supposed to be the big kid on the block. We're supposed to be, like it or not, the world's police. And I think when it comes to the United States Department of State, you can have a metered response. When it comes to the Department of War, yeah, fuck around and find out. I liked it.
The other thing you said was that this has never been done before. This gathering of top brass in one place to have the Secretary of War or Defense, whatever, speak to them. What do you think the intention of that was?
I think he wanted to look his leaders, senior leaders, in the eye and tell them without any filter, without any spin, exactly where his intentions for the Department of War were. And I think to that end, he did it. I think I'm not going to comment on Hegseth's legitimacy to fill the position. It's irrelevant. He's filling it. Doesn't matter if you think he should or not. He is. He has a job to do. And his job is to look at the Department of War and its 1.2, 1.3 million employees and say, are we meeting the vision? Are we meeting the vision of the national defense strategy? Are we meeting the vision of the National Command Authority, i.e. the president? And are we prepared to win the next war? He doesn't think we are. And he told his senior staff exactly that. We need to refocus on what our job is. And yeah, I don't think that the message was uncalled for. I think that there has been a slow, I don't want to say a decline because that's a bit much, but there's been a slip of some of our core values, core principles. And I don't necessarily think a wake-up call is a bad thing. People don't like it because they don't like him. They don't like the way it was done. But, if the last administration had just sent out a memo saying the same fucking thing, no one would have batted an eye.
Yeah, it is interesting because I do think that when you spend the time to gather all the people in one place, you're setting the tone for, a world that's pretty volatile right now. And it's much more poignant to do that. It's always much more poignant to do that in person than it is to deliver a message, period. No matter what the fucking message is to deliver it in person.
Yeah. I think he took advantage of his position as Secretary of War to bring his senior staff in and tell them exactly what he thought and allow the president to do the same. I don't have a problem with it. Just don't do it all the time. I mean, this should be a rare thing. This should be a once in administration thing. Other than that, you dilute the potency of it.
What about what the president said about training the military in the streets of American cities?
He says a lot of bombastic stuff. I don't take it at face value. I take it with a heavy dose of salt. I mean, one of the things about this particular president is that he does not speak or act very presidential. You have to understand that about him. I'm not rationalizing it and saying, well, but you kind of do. We spent the last 4 years justifying every gaffe that he made. Well, it's just Joe, he's old and he's forgetful and he does this and he does that. Well, you give him a pass, but you're not giving Trump a pass for being over the top and hyperbolic and bombastic. Nobody really believes that he's going to pick blue cities and use them as training grounds for the U.S. military. I mean, stop. Yeah, I get it. He probably shouldn't say stuff like that, but that's not the president that we have. He says dumb shit. You kind of have to pick and choose where he is saying something that is completely over the top and it's pure hyperbole and what is actually intentional and factual and executable.
But he has deployed the National Guard.
Yep, he has. And he has that right.
So you're not equating the military with the National Guard.
They are They're sometimes the same and they're sometimes not. I mean, the National Guard is it is a uniformed services, but it's citizen soldiers. They are under the purview of the governors. They are in a bit of a gray area. That's not gray. I mean, it's codified in law, but they're not under the Posse Comitatus Act that active duty men and women are. You are a reservist. You are a reservist for the state. And the governors may have jurisdiction, but they cannot call up the National Guard without the federal government authorizing it. So they still work for the U.S. military. They still work for the federal government. They are still part of the military. If they are acting as disaster response or firefighting, or in this case, supporting federal law enforcement, it still has to be turned on, if you will, from the federal government. And that means, the president. A governor asks to have the National Guard activated. They can't just do it by themselves. I don't consider the National Guard or even active duty military supporting federal law enforcement duties as U.S. military operating within the United States. I don't see it that way. It may be a nuanced argument, but
well, he doesn't. I mean, the governors don't want him to do it, and yet
yeah.
He's still doing it.
Yep, that's right, and that sucks because I don't dispute the fact that in many ways it is political. I don't know of any cities that are. See, this is a funny thing though, because there's no red cities that I can think of. I mean, help me out here. I'm probably wrong, but Atlanta, Chicago, LA, New York?
Well, no, it's not the cities. The cities are, every city is overtly liberal. I think it's the surrounding areas around the cities. Like in Georgia's case, I mean, the red is not Atlanta. That's
Correct.
Where the blue is.
So you're always going to send, if it's to a city, more often than not, that city is going to be blue, or whatever we refer to blue as. It typically will have a mayor that is a Democrat and probably against having federal troops in their city. Yeah.
But you don't, I guess what I'm asking is you don't see the like in LA, for instance, when the National Guard went in and then he called the Marine Corps in, you don't see that as relevant to what he said in the speech.
No, because I think what he was talking about in the speech was stationing, garrisoning, deploying active duty military units into the nation's cities. And that can't be done in this. It just can't be done. Certainly not with any scale. It's illegal. He's going to quickly find himself in a court battle that's not going to go his way. Supporting Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Yeah, I mean, it's within his purview to activate the National Guard to do that. I'm a little less clear on the U.S. Marines that he brought into the city. I'm not exactly sure how he's doing that, and I haven't looked into it enough on the legal side to speak with any authority on it.
Yeah, I don't know all of obviously the ins and outs of it, but I think it had to do with protecting the buildings. They weren't actually supposed to engage at any capacity.
Well, even the National Guard's not allowed to do that. They're not law enforcement. They have no law enforcement powers. The only thing they were doing was providing material support, logistics, that sort of thing. They were providing protection, physical protection if need be, but they're not reading anyone's Miranda rights to them. They're not arresting anybody. They're just, yeah, you're right. Now that you've jogged my memory, the Marines were there to protect federal property. But even that is a little like, I don't know. I really don't know enough about the law in that respect to weigh in on it. But that's not the point. That's not even the point of your question. Your question was Trump's comments at Hegseth's speech in reference to the National Guard and active duty military being deployed to the cities. I don't think it was. I think he meant something entirely different. So, no.
Yeah.
Fuck around and find out.
Yeah, if anything else, it's just, and I think the other thing that the press is talking about is, acclimating. It's at every step you're acclimating people to that idea that it becomes normalized, when you introduce the National Guard or the Marine Corps into the city streets of American cities. And there's a lot of pushback even from like somebody like Paul Rykoff that served in the military and who is, has a nonprofit, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans Against War or whatever. He even states that it's, extremely problematic at that level because, you're compromising the individual in uniform by asking them to face their own citizens, the very people they're supposed to be protecting.
How is that any different than the Los Angeles riots when the National Guard was called in? It's not. It's never going to be. It's an unpopular decision. I think it is a gross escalation that's not needed. But there's a couple of different issues at stake here. It's, do you want to talk about whether it's allowed? Do you want to talk about whether it's needed? Those are two different things. And then you want to talk about whether or not it's effective. And that's a third thing in and of itself. As far as whether it's allowed, it's perfectly allowed. He can do it. Is it needed? That's a tough one. Because, people are really upset with ICE wearing bandanas. I'll tell you, 5 years ago, you wouldn't have needed to. But now all you do is you take a picture of one of these ICE agents. You ask some AI algorithm to spit back who that person is. And, even without using AI, with just a couple of 30, 45 minutes of searching on the internet, chances are pretty good you can do an open source data scrape to find out who that ICE agent is, where they live, where their kids go to school. And the next thing you know, you've got bottles being thrown at your house. Your kids are ostracized or beaten up. It's an unpopular thing to tell somebody who's in the country you're not allowed to be here anymore. It's always been unpopular. Always. We go all the way back to the turn of the last century. We had, Chinese in San Francisco that were unpopular with the Irish. You had all of these, the railroads that were being built and all the labor that was brought over. We put Japanese in internment camps in World War II. We ostracized the Germans. My God, America has a history of telling one group of people that they don't belong here. It's not like 2025 is somehow, a Twilight Zone episode. We've been enforcing the borders for as long as we've had borders to enforce. So I don't know why everybody's getting upset about it suddenly. I don't.
I think it's just the methodology because, you look at, the ironic thing, and we had discussed this, this morning or yesterday, but, Obama is deported. He deported way more in his first term and this second term hasn't been decided yet, but he deported way more people than Trump ever did. But it wasn't the hyperbole.
It wasn't packaged the way that it's being packaged now. But like I said, Trump is extraordinarily bombastic. He's likes to brawl. This is exactly what he would do in almost every situation, which is to turn it up to 11. You combine that with the fact that ICE agents are now concealing their identity. They're arresting people in locations that they would never touch before that were considered sacrosanct. So it's a lot of attention. Not to mention the fact that when Obama was president, we were pretty polarized. But I don't think the country's ever been as polarized as it is now. So quite frankly, Trump could cure cancer tomorrow and somebody would complain about it and say that it's political and that it's from him, and they'll spin it in a negative way. There's nothing that this guy is going to do that's ever going to be welcomed by his detractors, no matter what it is. Your point's valid. The way that it's being done, it's pretty aggressive, and it's being done by people who, heretofore were not hated, vilified. And all this comes back to the National Guard. People are violently protesting against the immigration and customs officials. They're overwhelmed in some cases, not all, in some cases. And I think the National Guard was a response to that. I don't think it was needed, but I'm also not on the ground. You're not on the ground. I don't know. But, the rest of the world is probably looking at us and thinking, what the fuck is going on over here? There's a lot more that took place during the week that's worth an opinion, especially my opinion, and that's really why you tuned in to hear it. But that is enough for one sitting, and we'll see you again next week. Same time, same place, different topics. For the Carry On Podcast, this has been the Sitrep edition. As always, Brad Colbert, the Iceman here. Stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.